What's up, guys? Eric Codes here. I am on my walk during the workday, like I said I would be doing months ago. I was really just doing it on the weekends for a while there, but now every day, at least if it's nice out and I don't have rain. I have to get a treadmill or something. But anyways, that's besides the point. Let's get to the topic of conversation today, which happens to be, I think at the last video I posted, I mentioned that I am going to switch from doing projects, like new projects in PHP, to doing them in Ruby and Ruby on Rails. So I think what I'm gonna do is kind of document what it's like to make that switch, things I liked, things I didn't like, and you know, just for anybody that's looking for that type of information out there, what it's like to go from one environment to another and XYZ. So I finally, I think what I did the last video, I told you I was developing on a MacBook, and Ruby on Rails works so easy on a MacBook, whereas my main development machine is a Windows machine. And that's mainly because of, where I work, we basically remote in, and we're all Windows machines at work, and so remote desktop works really nice on a Windows machine, you know, because it's a Windows machine. A Windows machine, multiple screens, that sort of thing, and so it doesn't work as smooth on a Mac. And so when I built my rig, I built it to be a Windows PC because, number one, got a whole lot more power for the value, you know. I think I built my machine for like $1,400 or $1,500. It's got 64 gigabytes of RAM in it. It's got, I think, 4 terabytes of storage. It's got a 4070 Ti graphics card. It's got, you know, it's got a i7, most current generation i7 processor. So it's beefy, and to get that same sort of thing from a Mac Studio, you know, I'd be looking, you know, probably $4,000 or $5,000. So Windows was the easy choice. Not that I don't like developing in Mac, because I really do. So anyways, getting on the tangent again, we talked about if you have a Mac trying to start development on Ruby, it's going to be super easy. You go to the Ruby documentation, official documentation, just do it. Follow exactly what it tells you to do. Ruby will be installed as long as your operating system is up to date, which it wasn't for me. So I had a problem with Mize, and I had a problem with a couple versions of like MySQL and things like that didn't line up quite right, and it broke a lot of stuff, and I had to fix it. But for most people, if you have a current MacBook or current Mac, it's gonna be pretty easy to get you know, that up and running. Whereas when I did it on Windows, so I have heard not a good idea to develop Ruby on Rails apps on Windows. And not so much that it would be hard to install, because they have a Windows installer, and they, you know, I could use all the versions of MySQL I already have, and yada, yada, yada. I could do all that stuff. But the problem was, when I went to install it, or when I went to install, but when you go to move that project, or to use gems, which are like packages, you know, functionality that you're gonna want in your project, not all of them work in a Windows environment. So you need more of a Linux environment. So instead, what you need to do if you're developing on Windows, the cleanest way to do this is to install WSL2, which is basically a Linux subsystem that runs on Windows, right? So when you install that, you basically have, you know, a Windows machine within, or a Linux machine within Windows. So that works great. Then you can install Ruby. You just follow it exactly as it says on the site. There were a few things that were missing in Windows. I had to activate. So you go to your search bar and you go turn on Windows, and that should bring up what you want. And you'll be able to switch and turn on certain things. So you want to make sure that your Windows subsystem is checked. And what was it? Revise. Start with a V. I can't remember what it was, but I had to turn something on because the install didn't work, and it told me. But the command line told me what needed to be turned on, and I did, and it worked. I had to restart my machine, and then we had Linux. Ubuntu is what the version of Linux is that I used anyways. So, boom, extra step, but hey, Linux is on. And then once Ruby told me it couldn't go once Mize was on, and Ruby told me that it couldn't install without that thing turned on, we were good. We were golden. Then fired up the Ruby app, no problem. However, it was using SQLite, and I didn't want to use SQLite. I wanted to use MySQL. So to do that, there's actually a really nice command. So when you start a new Rails app, you basically use a flag. You say -d, which you say what database, and then you say -d MySQL, and it'll do it. However, again, fresh Linux install, MySQL wasn't on there, so I had to put MySQL on there. I had to put MySQL on there. So, all right, I got MySQL on there. I updated the fact that, on my local machine, I wanted the username to be root. I wanted no password there, to make it nice and smooth to start this whole thing up. Well, actually, I had to do that because then when I fired Ruby up, it told me, hey, there's no user that's allowed because it uses a remote signature, uses some sort of signature in the machine to be like, this is the machine that's accessing, and it didn't have a username and password, and Ruby needs a username and password. So again, I had to delete that and then start another thing, right? Another project. And then we were good, right? So database was connected. Had to make the database tables, but it was good. It was set. However, I don't know anybody in their right mind who likes working with a database through the command line. I'm sure there's some crazy people out there, but not me. I like to be able to see my tables and navigate through. So, had to find some sort of way to access that. Now, I use PHP MyAdmin all the time, working with PHP at work. If I'm, at home, because my Windows machine has it's got a problem with XAMPP because of some sort of antivirus that work wanted me to put on. So it was going to install funny, and all right, screw that. PHP has a built-in server, so I'll just use the built-in server instead of doing the XAMPP setup with Apache and all that other stuff. It's development environment, but it's fine, right? But I'll use Table Plus. I wanted to use Table Plus to connect to the instance of MySQL running within the Linux machine. And it was some backwards way to have to do all these different commands and stuff. And honestly, I didn't want to break anything. So I was like, all right, is there something that exists that I can install on my, subsystem, my Linux subsystem, and still be able to see it within Windows? And it turns out there was. So I went, I installed that. There's a couple commands you had to run into the to Ubuntu, and then it brought up the thing. It brought up the database program. I believe it's called dbeaver. That's not the greatest looking thing, but whatever. It's a database. I just got to be able to see what I'm doing in there and see the tables and run some queries in the database. It's fine. But finally, it is set up and it's going. So, I guess that's step one, right? Getting your machine together, getting your machine ready to develop it. And I told you, doing it on my Mac, sure, I had some problems with an older Mac and the latest versions of MySQL and all those different things. So there are a few hiccups, but honestly, straightforward and easy. When doing it for Windows, it was more difficult. There was definitely a higher challenge to getting started, and kind of learning some things on the way. There's usually tutorials on YouTube that you could follow. I'll tell you exactly what to do. For me, I try to, unless I need a tutorial, I don't usually use it, because as a programmer, as I'm sure you know, most of the programmers watching this, you learn way more from fumbling through something and, sorry, I'm out of breath, but aggressively walking here. You learn more from aggressively you learn more from fumbling through something and doing it wrong and then getting it right eventually than you do by following a tutorial. And I'm assuming, I mean, now that it's set up, it shouldn't have to do it again for a while, but it is nice to know what needs to happen there. So again, on Mac, easy, run the commands. You know, as long as you have the current, Apple operating system, the current Mac OS, it's going to be smooth. You just follow the commands and boom, you're done. Whereas, if you go Windows, it's going to be a little more difficult. You have to get the subsystem for Linux installed. Once that's good, then you need to basically treat it like a brand new machine. It's not going to have MySQL. It's not going to have, anything on there. So you're going to have to get that set up. Like I said, I use dbeaver as like a database viewer so I can see what's going on in there. And then you need to install the Linux extension for VS Code, right? Because you're not going to write code like on Nano, the Nano command or something like that, right? So you're going to want to do that in VS Code, but VS Code makes it super, super nice. You install the extension. It's got like a little button that you click in the bottom left corner. It says it knows that there's a distro that's running. You connect that distro, you go open folder, you find the folder you want to open. VS Code's good. So that worked pretty well. But again, another thing that you need to do on Windows if that's what you're going to do, which is why I think most people say, if you're going to develop, you should be developing it on Mac or on Linux, because you don't have those issues. So yeah, that was step one, right? Step one, get the thing up and running. Now, I have to admit, like, step two is going to be a lot easier for me to figure out because I've already played with Ruby a little bit, where you're using the command line, the Rails command line to create scaffolding and create migrations and models and all those different things. We'll go into that in another video. Maybe I'll actually share screen in one of these at some point. But again, the whole point of this video series when I started was to get outside and get the excess developer weight off of my body because I went from a job where I worked 65 hours a week on my feet 12 hours a day. So I was always in great shape. 3 years as a developer, full-time developer, I should say, because I was a part-time developer a little bit for there. But 3 years as a full-time developer, it takes a toll on your body, especially when you work from home and the snack closet's right there. So, hey, we got to make changes. And first step in anything, whether that's trying to lose some weight or trying to learn a new programming language or whatever it is you got to start somewhere. And the secret sauce is just start. The hardest part of getting out for the walk is putting on my shoes and walking out the door. Once I'm out, I go and I do it. So same thing goes for if you're developing something. Hardest part was taking the initiative to say, you know what? Let's learn Ruby. Let's learn Ruby on Rails. That was the hardest part, doing that. And then today, what we did, right? Taking the steps to get it going, right? And now, anytime I open up my machine to do development, all I got to do is open Ubuntu, start the command line, find the project I want, the Rails server, serve that puppy up, open up VS Code, open up the remote connection or the Linux connection, and we're good, man. Probably even open up because it was the last thing I opened. So we're set. But anyway, so that's going to be for the next few weeks here. I don't know how many videos I'll do on this, but I'll mark it so that everyone can follow and say, we'll say something about like, switching to Ruby part 1 or, whatever it is. So, but that's it. So if you're switching to Ruby out there and you're on Windows, it's a little harder than if you're on Mac, but it's doable. It wasn't crazy. It was a couple hours, to figure out how everything worked and what I needed. It tells you pretty good, like, especially Ruby has some pretty good error reporting. It'll tell you exactly what's wrong, and you just kind of do that. And if you have a problem, jump over to ChatGPT or Grok or whatever it is that you like and put in what you're getting and you'll find your way. So that's all I have for today. Again, it's going to be a multi-part series, so stay tuned for the rest of it. This is Eric Codes. Everyone, have a great day. We'll see you.